general public comment. And so that's the next item that we're going to take up. And during this time, the public is invited to make comments on items in the public interest that are in the Planning Commission's matter of jurisdiction and that are not listed on the current agenda. And the public comment is limited to 3 minutes per person. So I'm going to turn it over to our moderator, Mr. Roberts, to hear from the public tonight.
Thank you, Chair Potter. I'll invite our attendees, our members of the public joining us tonight, to raise your hand using the Zoom function tool. And I do not see any hands raised for general public comment. I'll pass it back to Chair Potter. Oh, I apologize. We have one hand raised. Raccoonson, I'm going to share my screen first, actually. Okay, Raccoonson, I have allowed you to speak. You'll need to unmute yourself.
Thank you. Just a quick couple general comments relating to potentially Planning Commission items. The first of which just has to do with the city's wireless ordinance, and just want to reiterate, I think there's a groundswell of public opinion opposing 5G or cellular service for last mile delivery of broadband in the city of Petaluma. And I would love to lobby for the idea of Petaluma taking over the development of infrastructure for delivery of broadband via fiber optic cable to individual homes and building units. And I think in one of the presentations by the Technology Committee, it was acknowledged that internet at this point is almost like a utility. They said it is a utility, a basic need. And seeing as municipalities and cities are largely responsible for delivery of water, electricity, and other utilities, or at least not delivery, but the infrastructure, I would love to lobby this group to press forward with exploring options for developing delivery of fiber optic cable or implementation of fiber optic infrastructure as last mile delivery service to buildings throughout Petaluma. Thank you.
Thank you for your comment. Up next is Paul G. Paul, I've allowed you to speak. You'll need to unmute yourself.
Listen, thank you very much for the time. I'm going to build on the last person's comments. I am absolutely involved in this whole fiber thing, and it's very important to understand what the players have done so that we can take advantage of what is going on right now in 2022. See, broadband via fiber optic to the home is actually much less expensive to build than wireless broadband. And FTTP is much more energy efficient, using thousands of times less energy every day, energy savings which grows with every passing day, to move the same volume of data wired versus wireless. If you're going to be a green city, you don't want any wireless broadband. Much better by fiber optic cable. The industry knows this. They just make more money with wireless. That's the problem. You don't have to go along with that. Please look at the actual data, not what you read in mainstream media, which has been legally publishing propaganda since 2012, thanks to the Smith-Munn Modernization Act. What you have to do is go to the original documents. We should set the goal to future-proof internet delivery to a common standard, at least 45 megabits up and down, because that's what they agreed to provide back in the 90s, across the entire city with fiber optic to every building, home, government, or business. That is how one delivers actual equity instead of paying lip service to equity. Providers can string fiber on the existing utility poles in the older neighborhoods like mine. I already have Sonic.net, and we know this works. Now, for newer neighborhoods with underground utilities already, there is no need to dig any new trenches for fiber optic. Let me repeat that. No need to dig any new trenches. The fiber optic can be pulled through the existing public utility conduit, which is shared by many providers already. Legacy copper landlines, cable TV, PG&E, and any fiber provider directed to do so. Direct your fiber provider to do that. It's a myth that ISPs have to dig for last mile fiber delivery. It's completely unnecessary. ISPs just do this to control the asset. We don't have to go along with that. The only digging needed is for additional middle mile trunk lines along arterial roads, not needed in neighborhoods at all. And that fiber should be shared by all. The truth is there's a lot of dark fiber out there put in the ground by AT&T, and they broke the contract. You, as the city of Petaluma, can go after that breach of contract and now claim ownership of all of that dark fiber because it's in the public conduit. It is what we put in the ground with public money. How much? $5 per month per phone bill since the 1990s all the way through the present. They stole that money and they used it to build out the wireless network. That's illegal. Section 254K of the 1996 Telecommunications Act. So by owning the existing fiber, now the city has a profit opportunity, instant city revenue. You get to actually lease it to all of the providers. You are the quality control agent. You are the one that ensures we have actual equity and not just lip service for equity. Everybody gets the prize. That's how you win. So you got to have win by talking to the public, not to the industry.
Thank you for your comment, Paul. Up next is Veronica O. Veronica, I've allowed you to speak. You'll need to unmute yourself.
Hi, good evening, everyone. Just an announcement. Tomorrow night is the Know Before You Grow speaker series, and they are hosting Charles Marone, who is presenting his book tour presentation of Confessions of a Recovering Engineer, Transportation for a Strong Town. And he is going to talk about how transportation and its history in the United States over the last 60 years has provided a lot of problems, and he is going to go through a series of points on how we can fix that. So I think it's very relevant to the planning sphere, although it doesn't sound like it because it's transportation. It is tomorrow night from 7 o'clock to 8:30. And it's going to be, if you go to urbanchat.org, you can find the event there. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Veronica. It appears that was our last hand raised from members of the public. I'll stop sharing my screen and pass it back to Chair Potter.
Thank you, and thank you, members of the public. I'll now close the general public comment period, and we'll move on to item 4, our committee reports, and we'll start with the council liaison, Councilmember McDowell.
Thank you very much. Council's been busy, and you'll see with so many of these things coming up soon. District elections is, of course, the highlight of the greatest changes to our community right now. And next week we'll have our 4th public hearing, and that will be getting towards the finish line of mapping each of the districts where each of the new council seat districts will be, and trying to identify the community of interest that overlap to create good districts. So stay tuned on that one. That's coming to the finish line, and we'll create a whole new council after this year's election. There's also been progress on the fairgrounds. As you know, there was a meeting in January, and a public meeting, and that was to introduce the topic of how the process will work, to discuss the fairgrounds lease, not specifically what happens there, but just what the process will be towards what happens there. And so the council will hear that next on February 28th. And that promises to be complex and very positive. Also, the city has held a public meeting for the North McDowell Complete Streets project. It'll be the major road project. There's been other major road projects in past years, probably one a year, with Snowman Mountain Parkway and then South Boulevard happening. But right now, all the public input is coming in on the McDowell, North McDowell Street. So that's really important to connect with the public on the active transportation element, that is the bike and walking part of North McDowell. Also, I'd just like to reiterate that the Know Before You Grow meeting tomorrow that our speaker mentioned, they just bring the best national speakers to town. It's an opportunity locally like no other. And on the fun and light side of things, there's been our Age Friendly group has pulled together a grant from for chess tables so people can play chess. And the selected site is right near the Balshaw Bridge. And this past weekend, they had a pop-up event where they popped up card tables instead of these permanent tables that they'll have there in the future. But it's so well received, people stopping and talking. And that's the whole point of it, is to improve community relationship opportunities, young, old, everyone, and to help activate spaces that we want as planning our town to be activated. So that's exciting. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember McDonald. And now we'd like to go to Commissioner Hooper to see what's going on with the Bicycle Pedestrian Committee.
We are actively working on our active transit plan. Last meeting, we discussed core principles and priorities, and we're looking at the next phase at the following meeting. A lot of my reports for the next few months will probably be a lot of me just talking about the active transit plan, but that's what we're in the middle of and we're really excited about. Thank you.
Thank you. And Commissioner Wisman, a report from the Tree Advisory Committee.
You bet. Thank you, Madam Chair. So at the last Tree Advisory Committee, we, on the old business agenda, we took up some follow-ups on the tree technical manual, which is, you recall, I believe sometime last month, late last year. This is a presentation by the Tree Advisory Committee to the Commission. The Commission provided some feedback, and we discussed about how to incorporate that feedback into the technical tree manual that will then be forwarded on to the council. In terms of new business, there was discussion of how to incorporate more tree-friendly policies into existing ordinances that the city already has. So we ran down a number of best practices that have been adopted in other cities around tree propagation, tree removal protection, financial support potentially for city arborists, maintenance and guideline standards, and also education of the community as well as tree maintenance providers. There was also discussion, a reminder of Arbor Day coming up in April, and some events that are planned across the city for that. And as those become more firm, I'll report those back upcoming council or commission meeting.
Well, thank you for that report. We're looking forward to celebrating spring and Arbor Day. Are there any other commissioners who have any reports at this time? Okay, seeing none, I'd like to move on to the director's report, item 5. Interim Community Development Director Hines will provide.
Thank you, Chair Potter, commissioners, members of the public. A few updates that I wanted to provide. We are looking at reopening City Hall for limited hours starting next week. So we will be returning to our Tuesday and Thursday 10 to 2, which is the hours that we had reopened prior to the holidays and prior to the current COVID surge that we were trying to ensure safety for all staff and members of the public. So starting next Tuesday, we will be reopening those public facing counters such as planning and building from 10 to 2 on Tuesdays and Thursdays. I wanted to alert commissioners, there is an upcoming Cal Cities Planning Commissioner Academy that has some very interesting training opportunities, and I will send more information directly with some links and offer assistance to get people registered for that if they would like to. It is in San Ramon and middle of March, and there's some really pertinent sessions, kind of, planning 101 basics, also CEQA, what goes into a finding, some really excellent training, as well as some specific things such as wildfire, planning for wildfire as part of your general plan, and some of those kind of real current SB 9, understanding Senate Bill 9, streamlining affordable housing, those type of things. So I will forward those. I also wanted to call your attention, you probably saw it on the draft agenda, but I wanted to call your attention to it, and we will be doing a quorum check this week with all of you, but holding a joint study session on parking regulations with the city council and hopefully the Pedestrian and Bicycle Advisory Committee, looking to schedule that for March. Oh my goodness, now I'm gonna forget. I think it's March 28th. Yes, March 28th. So look for an email from Evelyn just to verify quorum availability for that. And then also wanted to add to your radar that at the next meeting, staff will be providing a presentation on our annual progress report for our housing element to kind of just give you a snapshot of where we are with our reporting that's going to the state. And this is really wrapping up this cycle as we move into starting to plan for our 6th cycle housing element. So just a little teaser for what to look forward to later in the month. I was also going to mention the Know Before You Grow meeting tomorrow, and then also reminding everyone that there is a general plan advisory committee meeting on next Thursday, the 17th at 6:30. It's a great way to stay involved with what's happening with the general plan, and the committee will be talking about final revisions to their vision statement and guiding principles that they have been working on, and incorporating all the feedback received during visioning efforts, the quadrant meetings, the pop-ups that have been held, and also discussing a discussion diagram that is really kind of the graphic representation of a lot of that input that has been received to date before forwarding those on to the city council. So that is my update. Happy to answer any questions if I'm able to, and lovely to see you all.
Any questions of Councilmember Alonso?
Thank you, Madam Chair. And Heather, I was wondering if you could provide an update on the public signage on Howard Street on the city-owned house, and if that sign's been taken down.
It has not been taken down since we last emailed about it, but I'm working on getting someone out there to take it down.
Okay. Just for the commission's context, the public signage was a notification for a council meeting back in October of 2020. And so I've asked many times for that sign just to be taken down. The meeting was a long time ago. So thank you for getting that taken care of.
Commissioner Wiseman.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Heather, thank you for raising the item about the housing element and the update there. Coming out of some of my comments of the last commission meeting, it'd be helpful as a request, if maybe we can have a study session at some point, or just a written dashboard or some type of indication on how we are performing from the perspective of our RENA mandates with the state, where we are in our progress, the 5th housing element, what the 6th housing element looks like, so that the commission has some context in which we view projects that are in front of us and how we're performing against those goals. So just a general request, and I'll leave it up to you and your staff, either put it on the agenda item for us, or we can talk about it further.
And so part of that is exactly what you will receive at our next meeting. And I believe we did that last year as well. As each year, we have to file an annual progress report to the state in April. So usually in March, we go before the city council to provide them with that update, and they accept that update of the annual progress report. I believe last year we came also to the Planning Commission to provide that update, and plan to do the same. So it's looking at where are we in the 5th cycle, what's in the pipeline, what's been approved but not constructed, those kind of measurements. Additionally, in the next couple months, we will be coming before you with information kind of to start that discussion about the sixth cycle. So the regional housing needs allocation for Petaluma were approved by the state. Our number has settled at 1,910 units. Those are distributed among the different income levels, but that's what we need to plan for in our sixth cycle. And so we are starting to look back with the help of our housing elements specialist that's part of the general plan team, Veronica Tam. We're doing some, analysis of, okay, where are we? What's in the pipeline, but won't be considered complete by July 1. So we'll be able to be counted in our next RENA cycle for the sixth cycle. What are those properties that were included in the fifth cycle housing element, and what's the status of them? And ultimately we'll start moving into a discussion of, are those appropriate sites? Are they not appropriate sites? What other sites do we as a community want to look at? So you are going to have a series of different housing things coming up. I would say, in the next 4 months, you're probably going to hear a lot about housing. So something to look forward to, I guess.
Perfect. Yeah, no, that's I think that hits the nail on the head perfectly. Thanks.
Yeah, great.
Thank you. And I echo Commissioner Wisman's comments about the need for this commission to understand where we are with our housing obligations and to be able to evaluate each project in the context of that. So if there are no more comments or questions for the director, we can move on to item 6, which is approval of the minutes. I believe you all received the draft minutes for the January 11th, 2022 meeting in the packet. And so if there are no questions or revisions, we can go ahead and approve those minutes. Any comments? Okay, those minutes are approved. And with that, I'd like to move on to the first presentation of the night. And it looks like Director Hines, you'll be giving the presentation on the Visitability Code revisions. And I thought it was a great staff report that was included in the packet. And I'm looking forward to hearing more about this effort to provide, housing that is right for everyone living and visiting here.
Great. So yes, I'm going to give a presentation, but before I launch in, I just want to, this has been a joint effort across departments. Charles Lucas is our chief building official and is here tonight, as well as Dylan Brady, assistant city attorney. So they will definitely be helpful in responding to questions that may come up. But let me share my screen and we'll run through a brief PowerPoint. Okay, thumbs up, you can see my screen? Yes, okay, great. So thank you, commissioners. Tonight we are before you to talk about a draft ordinance that will be going before the City Council. It is amendment to actually the Petaluma Municipal Code, section 7.14, to create a new section called Visitability and Universal Design. And I just want to kind of run through some of the important background that really sets the context for why we are doing this. So the staff report included a lot of this information, but for those members of the public that maybe didn't find the staff report gripping, just trying to hit some highlights. So Petaluma's population is aging at a rate faster than both Sonoma County and the state. In 2000, our population age 65 or older had increased by, since 2000, by almost 60%, 57.7%. And almost 32% of our population is 55 and older, 6.6% 75 or older. So really wanting to make sure we are thinking when we're developing, when we are designing housing, how to make that housing fit our needs specific to Petaluma. Additionally, 26% of US adults have some type of disability that can be, mobility limitations, cognition, independent living, hearing, vision, self-care. So really a quarter of adults in the US have some sort of disability that necessitates additional consideration. And from our housing element, fifth cycle housing element, 5,112 Petaluma residents have at least one disability. And again, 46.8% of city's seniors have physical conditions that may affect their abilities to live independently. So really wanting to make sure we are thinking about that as we are moving forward with residential development. Age friendly is something, it's a worldwide movement. It's really focused on that exactly, creating livable communities for people of all ages. It was formalized originally with the World Health Organization and then AARP in the US. And there's currently over almost 583 US communities that have committed to being age friendly. In Sonoma County, the county itself was the first in 2016 to really establish that commitment, and Petaluma became the second city in Sonoma County to commit to being age-friendly in 2020. So this is something that we made that commitment. City is currently working on identifying a range of things. Councilmember McDonald brought up the chess tables, that is one aspect of this. So it really is a lens that we are looking at city initiatives with the age-friendly consideration. So when the City Council adopted citywide goals and priorities for 2021 through 2023, one of those goals is a safe community that thrives. And under that goal is a specific work plan that said, consider adopting visitability ordinance to provide accessibility in new single-family home construction. And this was really prioritized by the council also for being something that they wanted to see implemented this fiscal year. And that's why we are before you, working through our work plan items. So the ordinance that is going to the City Council, as I mentioned, is a Petaluma Municipal Code amendment. It is not a zoning code amendment, but because there's so much overlap with these standards in terms of how residential projects would be designed, we wanted to come before the commission as a feedback loop, even if it's not specifically called out as discretion of the Planning Commission. The amendment would be to our local building code, which is a very important tool that cities can further local goals in addition to adopting the state mandates. And this is the same way we looked at our all-electric code, was a local code adoption that also came before this commission for feedback before going to City Council. So the proposed ordinance would amend the 2019, which is our current code cycle that we're in, and would add the section to include visitability and universal design standards for new residential buildings. And really, these local amendments are considered necessary to enhance the full cycle use, life cycle use of housing, ensuring they're designed and constructed to meet the needs of our local population. The State Department of Housing and Community Development created a model ordinance to really help guide local jurisdictions that wanted to adopt these provisions. It created a template for voluntary local adoption and really became the baseline when we were considering and drafting the ordinance that is being presented. So if the city does adopt a visitability ordinance, it does need to be filed with the Housing and Community Development Department to allow HCD to evaluate the ordinance for consistency with state code, health and safety code section. So the proposed amendments, as I've mentioned, amendments to the municipal code, it would create this new section in our code. We're doing it to implement that work plan item. It also really implements other goals and priorities and specific initiatives, including policies in the general plan, including the housing element, our age-friendly designation, as well as the climate emergency framework that really focuses on providing safe housing opportunities for everyone, despite age, or disabilities. The amendments as proposed are consistent with provisions for local amendments to the California Building Safety Code and builds on that model ordinance that HCD developed. So you have a lot of detail in the staff report. I'm going to run through some of the kind of key components of this ordinance that I think are probably of particular interest to people when looking at this. So the applicability as proposed in the draft ordinance is it would require or apply to all new residential development. It differentiates there's really two key components. One applies to new residential buildings with 4 or fewer units, and that requires all the dwellings in those buildings to meet requirements as a visitable dwelling. And I'll get into a little more about what each of these means in a minute. The other category is residential buildings with 5 or more units. And for those new construction of 5 or more units in a building would require that at least 30% of the units meet requirements of universal design. So again, it's applying to all new construction with some limited exceptions or exemptions. And just of note, it does exempt projects that have already received their site plan and architectural review approval prior to effective date of the ordinance, should it be adopted by the city council. And the reason we are proposing this is there are some of these aspects that really change a project in terms of the way they're designed, the footprint of them, the entrance to them. And so it really could change the design, it could change requirements, it could theoretically require coming back before this body for a new SPAR approval if design had to change to meet those new requirements. So as it's written, it would exempt projects that already have their SPAR approval at the effective date of the ordinance. So visitable dwellings, those are what I referred to for residential construction of 4 or fewer units. So this is really providing key design features which make the home easier for mobility impaired people to visit or live in these units. So the key components: accessible primary entrance, an accessible interior route or hallway, so that once somebody enters the house, they can move through the house with relative ease. So a lot of that is the width of the hallway, an accessible common room to visit in, and an accessible powder room on the primary floor. It does not have to be a full bath, but at least a powder room. So these are generally, if you're incorporating them into the initial design and construction, should have relatively minimal costs. It greatly enhances the long-term livability of the home for people as their needs change or as the needs of their loved ones change. They can still come and visit. And again, it's residential buildings with 4 or fewer units. So universal design dwellings, it's a little more extensive. It requires all the same things that the visitable dwelling requires with some additions. So it allows for modification to be made so that the unit can be adapted to be fully accessible, allows for modifications to be made as the needs of the resident change. And it facilitates the ability for, again, somebody to age in place. So it also includes an accessible bedroom accessible kitchen, accessible laundry facility, and then there's some other design features such as, the light switches and the flooring material. And all of this is referring back to other sections in the building code in terms of, accessible kitchen, bedroom. And again, to emphasize, this would apply to new residential development with buildings at 5 or more units, and it would require that 30% of the units in those buildings would be designed as universal design dwellings. As I mentioned, we did think it important to include some exemptions because each site has unique characteristics, and we really felt it was impossible to write an ordinance that absolutely everything would work no matter the conditions. So we did include a section that has limited exemptions at the discretion of the building official. It would be up to the applicant to demonstrate that compliance with a specific regulation could create an undue hardship, and looking at really the overall evaluation of the cost to provide access, cost of the project, the impact of that compliance on the feasibility of the project, the nature of accessibility to be gained or lost by doing this. And another thing I really think was important is we wanted to make sure there was a chance to look at kind of unintended consequences that created a negative impact on the natural environment. And when we were thinking about this, a big one was hillside homes. So we wanted to make sure we weren't requiring something theoretically on a hillside lot that would require so much additional grading that then it would really, be in the face of some of our other regulations and climate initiatives to build in harmony with the natural topography, or to limit, off-hauling fill, those kind of things. So this list of considerations would guide the building official's review of a request for hardship. So as I mentioned, the proposed ordinance is being presented to implement work plan item 95. Staff recognizes that it does a little more than the strict wording of that work plan item, because that work plan item specified visitability ordinance for new single family dwellings. So this includes both visitability and universal design. It also goes beyond just single family homes and includes all residential at different levels. So wanted to solicit any input from the Planning Commission that they may have, and included a few different considerations that are similar to what we are laying out for the council in case the full ordinance is not the direction that the council wants to go. So for instance, we could revise the ordinance to really meet the letter of what was called for in work plan item number 95 and just have visitability and just have it apply to new single family homes. The ordinance could be revised to include the visitable dwelling unit requirements, but just eliminate universal design, or make visitable dwellings mandatory and voluntary requirements for universal design. So there's a lot of different ways to look at this. I know the public comment letter that you all received was asking for a recommendation to exempt single family dwellings, particularly custom homes, not part of a larger developer project. So, that is another thing that is brought forward by a member of the public that the commission could consider. And that is the conclusion of my presentation. Let's see if I can stop sharing. There was a lot of information in that staff report, tried to touch on the highlights. Happy to answer any questions of the commission along with my colleagues, and take any feedback that you'd like us to forward to the council as we move this forward for their consideration.
Well, thank you so much for the presentation. Are there any questions about what was presented before we hear from the public? And then after that, we'll have an opportunity to give some of our feedback. Councilmember McDonald.
Thank you. Perhaps you covered this, but this applies to all special state oversight on local projects, the SB 9s, 330s. This applies to all independent of how they get to the cities.
Yes, there is a provision in the draft ordinance that specifically says that this is considered a objective design standard, which is kind of that key term for SB 35 or AB 2162 or any of those type of projects, say that we are limited to requiring consistency with objective design standards. So it is defined as such in the draft ordinance.
Perfect. And then if the planning official doesn't grant a exception, it follows the standard appeals process, which would be to planning commission, right?
Correct.
Thanks.
And Commissioner Bauer.
Thank you, Chair Potter. Well, I think this is a really great idea. Comments later, but maybe this would look like, say, for an apartment. A lot of these requirements seem like they would be on the ground floor, but would that require the building to have elevators in it, or what do you think that would look like? Say a multi-story building, like with 5 or 6 floors or something like that, and where they have to be 30%, be accessible.
Well, the thought is for some of the smaller, over 5 units, but the smaller multifamily, you would be able to provide these units on the ground floor. And there are some requirements in the building code now for, and I believe they're called adaptable units as part of multifamily projects. I believe even that the next item on the agenda has some units that are marked on the site plan with an A to meet those adaptability requirements that are currently in the code. When you do get into larger buildings, let's say you did have, a 5-story large multifamily, you're going to have elevator requirements as you get into those larger multifamily. And so then there's more, they don't all have to be on the ground floor because you do have that elevator to provide that access.
What is the minimum amount of floors that you would need an elevator for?
I would have to ask Charlie that. Charlie, is there a number of stories that triggers a requirement for elevator in a multifamily building?
So the buildings that have elevators and the buildings that don't have elevators are treated differently. The residential buildings, that is. We're not talking about commercial buildings. So they're treated differently, and it depends on the number of units, and there's a number of factors. So there's not a definitive answer to that question.
What I'm getting at is I wouldn't want this to prohibit us being able to plan for higher rise developments, because we can't fit everything on the ground floor that we need to. And if we were to build in like commercial ground floor space, and that would alleviate that opportunity too. So I just don't want to see in the future any unintended consequences. So I thought maybe it might be worth looking into or considering.
Well, I agree. It would be good to think about specific buildings. If you think about a building with 5 units, this is applicable in terms of universal design. And that universal design would apply to 30% of those units. So depending on how they're designed, which floors they're on, you might need an elevator in that building. So if you had 5 units and 2 of them are upstairs and 3 of them are on the ground level, you wouldn't need an elevator, if you see what I mean.
Right, yeah. And Yes.
And I'm trying to think of some of the larger multifamily we've had before this commission. So for instance, North River Apartments has elevators. That's probably one of our larger, and when Haystack, the Haystack project had elevators. The conceptual design for the Heinz project had elevators. So I'm trying to think of like some of the larger ones that I think you would be looking at that we have seen come in have had elevators included. And typically when it's been even, I believe the Meridian at Corona Station, some of their smaller buildings did not have elevators, but when they went up to the 4-story building that was kind of out at McDowell, it did have an elevator. So I know this is somewhat anecdotal, but just trying to think through what we've seen.
Yeah.
And that breaking point, even if we can't specifically say 4 stories and 20 units, you have to have an elevator. Just what we have seen with some of our larger projects have been elevators.
I think the 30% at 3 stories makes sense. Having that for more stories without an elevator seems like it's getting difficult. And then if we are asking for ground floor commercial, it gets even harder. So just to have something to think about, that's all.
And just another
That's all I
kind of
have.
anecdote to that, Commissioner Bauer, is once you start getting over 3 stories, not having an elevator is a significant impact on our emergency responders. So getting in, being able to get up and carry someone on a gurney down 4 flights of stairs. So there is often a lot of conversation when you start getting into those two, that from a health and safety perspective, our fire marshal has wanted to see elevators because of the impact and potential injuries to fire personnel responding to emergencies.
Right, yeah, thank you. I just know there's been some reluctance in the development community to install elevators in the past, but maybe this will change things.
So I wanted to ask for clarification on something that Commissioner Bauer asked. Can you have an accessible unit on a non-ground floor as long as you have an elevator?
Yes, correct me if I'm wrong, Charlie, but because all of the other aspects of it, you could accommodate. You can make the hallways wider. You can have a accessible bathroom, that kind of stuff. So the one thing you'd be looking at is that entrance. So if you had an entrance into the building that didn't have steps, you could enter into the building and get to an elevator to go up to then access that unit. You could have an accessible unit on an upper floor.
Okay, that helps. Councilmember McDonald.
Thank you. This does open up a whole kettle of what ifs. Do you recall Deer Creek? I mean, we approved it and I think it'll be back again someday, not dead. And were they 3 or 4 stories? And I think, and were they elevators? And I don't believe I've heard anything about visibility back then.
I'm for some reason I want to say they were 4 stories, but I'm not positive, but I can see if I can find that. I can't remember off the top of my head.
Yeah, and I'm sure it'll come up as a question at a different time. And then I was really happy that when the city did approve Ellis Street, they included one of 11 or 13 units that was a visibility on first. So I'm glad that this is moving from the 1 in a development to a bigger number in the development. Thanks.
Okay, and Commissioner Hooper?
Hi, I just wanted to say first off, on the question of 3 or 4 stories in an elevator, as someone who lives in an apartment complex, at 3 stories, if there's no elevator, how are you getting furniture into your apartment? So I would find it questionable that there wouldn't be an elevator to begin with. But I did want to ask, for for the exemptions, and I really appreciated how thorough the report was and the different actions we could take. What does what does it look like to appeal now? And I only ask because if, for example, financial feasibility, which is listed as one of the exemptions in the report, that's the way that a project can appeal. I'm just wondering if a lot of this discussion could be reduced by the simple fact that if it requires something so astronomically excessive, then it would be viable for an appeal. So I'm just curious to know what that looks like now.
Right, so any decision, a staff level decision can be appealed. I believe how we wrote this is it's appealable to the building appeals board, is that correct?
That is correct, Heather.
Yeah,
This is
yeah,
Dylan,
it's
and-
not the planning commission, it's the building board of appeals. So if somebody requested a hardship, and it was denied by the building official, they could appeal it to the building board of appeals, and go before them. Interestingly enough, I don't think we have had any appeal of a building decision to the building board of appeals in at least a decade. So there are provisions for it in our code, but it is not something that happens often. So it is laid out that way. I think the way that we tried to put those exemptions and that ability for consideration of hardship was exactly for these reasons. The idea is not to make it impossible to build housing. And so also, there might be creative ways to look at it. Maybe it's based on something with the slope. It's really hard to get that accessible access through the front, but there is the ability to get it through a side door, so maybe it's not meeting the letter of the law exactly, but it's really looking at the context of what's happening on the site. And so that's where some of that discretion is to work with the building official.
That's perfect. Thank you.
Commissioner Alonso.
Thank you, Chair Potter. Yeah, to that topic, I know when we took up the inclusionary housing ordinance, there was a provision about a financial feasibility study that the applicant had to have a third party prepare that study. And I was curious, are there any discussions with this proposed ordinance with the financial feasibility to also be prepared by a neutral party, or just curious if other cities have tried that or what HCD has recommended on that?
Dylan or Charles, do you know? I don't know if HCD had anything specifically on that.
Yeah, I can answer that. Thanks, Heather. So the HCD model ordinance didn't have any of the exceptions. That's something that we created in the 4 or 5 other jurisdictions that I saw. They didn't have that. So that is something unique to Petaluma that we're doing. And just to add on your last question to your answer, Heather, it can be applied for an exemption for any specific section of our visitability ordinance. So if your entrance is too expensive or the environmental cost too much, they can appeal that and ask for an exemption. But no, HCD does not have that in their model ordinance.
And I believe actually the way it's worded in our inclusionary housing, it doesn't require that they provide that, but I believe it's something like it encourages or may want to consider if that's the reason they were asking for alternative compliance. And I actually don't think any of the requests for alternative compliance have actually done that. But it's an option in the code. So we didn't, I think the thought was to try to keep this an aspect of this kind of from getting, if somebody is saying, for instance, our assumption was a lot of those might be single family homes on hillside lots. So instead of, by the time you hire an outside consultant to create a report to submit to, make your case that your front entrance being accessible, it makes it more complicated. So I think we hadn't thought of going that direction, just out of trying to keep it straightforward, but simple too, and not too expensive, just to make your case.
Okay. I think I recall from the inclusionary housing ordinance that if an applicant wanted to make their case to the council, that they did not feel they could comply with the inclusionary housing ordinance, they did need to provide a third-party financial analysis to demonstrate why it wasn't feasible for them to comply with the inclusionary housing ordinance requirement. So I think, I'd be open to hearing what others think about this. Maybe for larger projects, we could require an independent study. I hear the concern or the feedback about single family homes. That makes sense if it's a mom and pop owner, but maybe for larger projects, my only concern is, maybe larger projects are just going to say they can't comply with it, even at 30%. So just wanted to throw that out there. Thank you.
Just for clarification, it sounds like there is a couple different ways an exemption could be sought. One would be on a particular feature that's required under the proposed ordinance. But then what I'm also hearing is there could be a request for a full exemption of the entire requirement. So is that how it's written? Maybe Mr. Brady could address that.
Sure, as soon as I find the unmute. That is how it is written, Chair. So a lot of discretion, and hopefully all applicants will be able to comply with the ordinance, but how it is drafted, it does allow exceptions.
Yeah, and so in light of that, comments from Commissioner Alonso, perhaps looking at what the threshold is that would require a full fiscal analysis, maybe perhaps not this accessible kitchen can't be fully actualized, but if the entire project is looking for an exemption. But with that, I'll ask Commissioner Bauer for her hand is up, and then we'll go to public comment.
Thank you, Chair Potter. I just had one more just question. The one thing that's kind of irking at me is the times when we have these like pedestrian oriented buildings, on main thoroughfares, and we're wanting the developers to put in ground floor commercial, which I'm supportive of, that say you had a 3 or 4 story building, how a developer would comply with this. And I wouldn't want them to come to us and say, well, we can't have the ground floor commercial because of this requirement. So would it be possible to have an exception for something like that if we were to require ground floor commercial? I just don't know otherwise how they were going to meet it without the use of elevators.
That's good feedback, and something, I don't think I have a fully formed response in terms of what that would look like, but it's a good consideration. If there's buildings that there's so many variations, right? So often the front part is facing the street and has ground floor commercial, but then there's space behind it on the ground floor that has the residential comes down, or North River Apartments, for instance, does have ground floor commercial up on the boulevard, but then on Water Street it doesn't, and so it has some opportunity for residential units on the ground floor on the Water Street, but not the Petaluma Boulevard. So there's lots of variations to that, but it's a good consideration.
Thanks.
Okay, with that, I'd like to open the public comment period and ask Mr. Roberts to facilitate that discussion.
Thank you, Chair Potter. It looks like we have a number of hands raised in our attendees joining us tonight. I'll go ahead and share my screen. Here's our 3-minute timer. Okay, and up next is Anthony Tussler. Anthony, I've allowed you to speak. You'll need to unmute yourself.
Thank you very much. I'm a wheelchair user and I live in Pengrove, and I live here because when we went looking for a house to buy in Petaluma, we could not find a house that would accommodate a wheelchair easily. So I am really excited about this ordinance. It goes far beyond anything I ever would have imagined. I think that this is it really shows the foresight of the staff and the council and the commission to be in support of something like this. I particularly want to note that the staff report is really nicely written and really helpful. I've been working on visitable housing in Sonoma County since the Tubbs fire, and we have not been able to make much headway. So I am very pleased that Petaluma is really showing the way. And I certainly think that this, looking at it through the lens of age friendly, is really a powerful way to go, because what we're talking about is being able to include everyone in the community in being able to find places to live. So thank you very much.
Thank you for your comment, Anthony. And up next is Racusin. Racusin, I've allowed you to speak. You'll need to unmute yourself, and I'll ask that you please state your name for the record.
Hi, this is Darren Racusin, and a couple questions that may be answered in a more detailed report. But would these regulations apply to significant remodels? And I'm speaking as someone who's just an individual private homeowner, and that question goes along with any dwellings created kind of under the umbrella of SB 9 or any ADU units. Would these regulations apply when it comes to getting planning permission, or if it is relevant, is there exemptions that could be put in place for people, depending on the scope of the project and the nature of the project, if it is an ADU or a split lot situation, creating housing maybe to accommodate another family member, a senior family member. I don't know if that would spill over into kind of the fiscal considerations, but just to make sure a project could move ahead in that vein, or have some kind of exemption to consider people in that situation. And then in the spirit of aging in place, kind of a bigger question that isn't directly related to this report, but it'd be great if the commission could comment on, is just the west side of Petaluma. The general impression, and I think anecdotal experience, and it might hold up under a survey, the west side of Petaluma has a larger demographic, I think, of a senior population. Maybe it's just because I know my father-in-law and a bunch of people that live out here that are older. And when it comes to infrastructure, the hospital is on the east side of Petaluma over the highway. So like I said, in the spirit of aging in place and accommodating kind of all members of our community, does this go along maybe, or has anyone thought about infrastructure developments like more connectors to the east side, anything with any kind of hospital considerations over on the west side? There was one I know in Hillcrest for a long time. So again, not directly related to this building ordinance, but just this idea of making the community more accommodating to our more elderly population by expanding access to necessary medical services and everything like that, to make it easier to age in place. Thank you.
Thank you for your comment. And up next is Chris Rebio. Chris, I've allowed you to speak. You'll need to unmute yourself.
Great, thank you very much. Chris Rebelo. I'm former chair of the Senior Advisory Committee. I'm on the GPAC. You can't see me, but I am doing a happy dance right now. I cannot tell you just how thrilled I am with this draft ordinance. As Anthony said, it goes far beyond what I had hoped for. I just think it's great. It's, older adults, those who are isolated, suffer from depression. And this really can literally open doors for people to be out and about and to visit with people and to have people come into their homes. It is so age friendly. I think about parents with those double strollers, young kids on crutches who might have broken a leg, and older adults with walkers. It's just great. And I love the universal design. I mean, to be able to, a simple thing like having an electric outlet, someplace that's easy to plug in, or light switches that work. it makes such a difference for livability and safety and aging in place. So kudos to the city, kudos to everybody that worked on this. And believe me, I'm in line to promote it and get it out there in any way possible. So again, happy dance at my end. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Chris. Our next comment is from Paul G. Paul, I've allowed you to speak. You'll need to unmute yourself.
Yes, thank you for the time. This is a very good discussion that everyone had tonight, and there's some good ideas here on the table. And I think it's great to include people of all ages in all your planning decisions like this to figure out what's the right thing to do. Now, unfortunately, with a lot of these efforts, you actually go in with unexamined assumptions. The first one is aging in place. Is that a desire that people have in Petaluma? Have you talked to people? Have you brought them together in a public workshop to figure out whether that's real or not so real? You know, a lot of people end up downsizing or changing their community where they live once the kids are gone and things. They make all kinds of different decisions. And they'd like to cash out of their property and go somewhere else for some other reason. So the whole point here is you can't necessarily say that everybody wants this. And so what I do think is that, yes, we have an issue here. We are in 2022. And guess what, folks? Agenda 2021 is already in place. The pack 'em and stack 'em plan is here. And we can thank Scott Wiener for that, for the state of California. So yes, we're putting in a bunch of multi-unit buildings in Petaluma and many other cities in California. So it is important to give good guidelines to those kinds of buildings. And yes, of course, elevators should be required for some number of floors. I'm going to guess 3. That's not hard to figure out. The question is, do you go through and do the same thing to single family homes? I'm going to say no. You actually have freedom in single family homes that you should be able to exercise. It's great to have guidelines. It's great to tell them the best way to build. It's great to give people good ideas. It's wrong to require single family home builders to do certain things. If they choose not to do it and choose not to spend their money that way, that's okay for them. Why? They own the property. They should be able to make these kinds of calls. We are in America. This is a place of freedom. This is a government of the people, by the people, for the people. If you don't talk to the people, you don't have any idea what they want. And that's the problem that I see happening all over the place within Petaluma. You have all kinds of great ideas, but you don't bring it out and get the input from the people very often. Sure, you'll have a meeting quickly like this and you ask for a 3-minute public comment. That's not that much. Now let's switch to disability. You wouldn't actually design a building where you could actually have cigarette smoke go from unit to unit to unit. That would never happen. You would never allow that to happen. But that is exactly what's happening when you don't shield these units from radio frequency microwave radiation. One wireless router goes into the next unit, the next unit, the next unit. There's a whole class of population, 10% of the population, which is now disabled by electromagnetic sensitivity. And it's coming big because anyone who got COVID is also getting this. You have to understand where this comes from. Ivermectin helps a bit, but you can't just blow it off. You have to think through these issues. I could never go into an apartment building. Me personally, I am electromagnetically sensitive. I have to live by myself. I couldn't stand 1 minute in a building like that. And understand, my population is growing. You have to think that through.
Thank you for your comment, Paul. Up next, we have Josh Simmons. Josh, I've allowed you to speak. You'll need to unmute yourself.
Thank you. I want to really commend staff for their work on the ordinance and all the research that's been done here. And I think it's a good sign, the foresight that is going into planning for a population that is aging. I also want to highlight that the importance of this ordinance for the chronically ill and disabled people of all ages. And I specifically want to advocate for leaning into universal design, including for new single family developments. A lot of the appeals processes and discussion around that, it seems all very well considered and like it's not a, there's not a look to do this in an onerous way. So just bravo for the work on this. Really appreciate specifically looking at universal design. Thank you.
Thank you for your comment, Josh. Okay, and I believe that was our last comment on this item. I'll stop sharing my screen and pass it back to Chair Potter.
And thank you again, Mr. Roberts, and I appreciate all the public comment. I'm going to bring it back to the commission to provide any final feedback to staff on the proposed regulations, and just mention that this is an information item. We won't be taking a vote tonight. So I see that Ms. Hines, you have your hand up.
Yeah, a couple clarifications from one of the commenters, just to touch on. So this would not apply to significant remodels. It would apply to SB9 or other state streamlined projects, housing projects, as an objective design standard. It would not apply to accessory dwelling units. And then the kind of larger overarching comment about, overall consideration of mobility and access to healthcare and those kind of things. That's a great topic that we will be looking at in our general plan update, which is underway, with age-friendly and being part of that vision. And when we start looking at land use patterns and transportation improvements and all of that kind of stuff during that, I would imagine that will be one of the lens we're looking at, is to make sure that everybody, regardless of what side of town they live on, have access to what they need to live happy, productive lives. So for that speaker, great way to stay tuned with the general plan update and discussion of that.
Okay, Commissioner Wiseman.
So I'd like to focus in on, actually, Chair Potter, the comment that you made right before going to public comment, which is the applicability of the exemptions to on a overall case specific basis, but also on a feature by feature specific basis. When ideas like this become codified, we have to understand that they're in place for many, many years, generations. And, things change over that time, one of which is technology and other things that, make a lot of these features, irrelevant or unnecessary. And I was looking through some of the features that in the staff report, many are quite prescriptive, and I'm supportive of the concept in general, but things like, switches for an overhead fan or, above an oven, or things like that could, certainly be obviated by, voice activated or other type of wireless controls and things like that. So if a builder or a developer can prove that they are some way, achieving the, desired outcome through a different angle, I think, we want to allow for as many exceptions like that as possible, so that it doesn't become overly burdensome, but nonetheless, the objectives are achieved. So it's the only point I wanted to weigh in on. Thank you.
Thank you. Commissioner Hooper.
Chair Potter, I just want to make sure we're in the comments phase, correct?
Yeah, this is a time for you to give additional feedback to staff, as this ordinance is going to be, revised and refined before it moves forward. So yeah, if you could share those ideas.
Thank you. I just want to make sure it wasn't still the question phase. First of all, I just wanted to say I was incredibly grateful to see this, to read through it. I'm glad that staff are thinking so far ahead on this issue. Just to respond to one of the comments we got for reasons not related to planning, I've actually talked to a lot of folks in the city, and there are a lot of concerns about aging in place. There are a lot of concerns about how they're going to stay here, how they're going to deal with living, really just accessing their own homes safely. And so really thinking ahead, especially with new housing development, but also new density development, I think is going to be really important for Petaluma, especially based on the statistics that you provided to us. I just want to say for the revision items, I am probably going to be one of the most friendly to what you've already put together, because I think this should include both single family residents and the higher density residents. And please absolutely keep the universal design requirements. I think we talked quite a bit about not making this too onerous, what the exemptions might be. But I think you've made it more than clear that if there is an issue, if this is going to have an unintended consequence, that there's a pathway for the developer to really hash that out with the city. And with that in mind, I'm not too concerned about this really gutting a project. And even thinking about 3 to 4 story developments, you know, just on the pragmatism side, I don't see how you get a 3-story apartment complex without an elevator. You have to get your bed frame, you have to get your couch, you have to get your tables and your drawers and everything in. You're not going to do that via stairwell. So I'm not too worried about this causing an onerous requirement for elevators, but I think overall this puts us in a good direction. And if we have to make modifications later because of a consistent unintended consequence, then so be it. But I'd rather we really lean into this. Thank you.
Thank you. And Councilmember McDonald.
Thank you. I did have one question before jumping into comments. And the question was, there's no correlation to any other means to escape this. You can't get a density bonus that helps you to get out. Is there any other escape clauses that we should be worried about hacking down the corners of this on?
Good question. I do not know off the top of my head if density, a concession under density bonus can be a building standard. I don't know if Dylan knows that off the top of his head, but something we can look into. I'm not aware of anything. And, you know, when we're dealing with density bonuses, it's almost always things like increase the building height or decrease the parking, which have typically been things that City of Petaluma has been relatively supportive of. So I don't know if you can exempt a building code requirement. Do you know, Dylan?
I would say that this is completely separate of any density bonuses. So as written, if you are building a new dwelling unit, you must comply with this ordinance.
And we can look into that as we head to council to be able to answer that with more definitively.
Thank you. So yeah, I am very, very excited to see this move through. I think it's a very important piece of city structure that we'll have. And you know, I look at this existing housing inventory of, you know, 20,000 units or whatever number we're at now for existing inventory, and the new units are at, we opened 100 doors, I believe, last year. I mean, that's not a lot of change. So I would be supportive not only of this on the new development, but on 50% remodels, something like that. And I know that's not what's on the table now, but I think to affect change, be it climate change or building code change or other things, we can't burden only new development to meet a standard. We have to take that on ourselves who already live here. And you know, when significant change occurs, 50% remodel, we put in a fire sprinkler, we should be bringing it up to all our codes. Part of the reason I feel so strongly is because I think that most of us haven't lived in this experience for a while. I was in a knee scooter for a couple months, and you get a little bitty touch of what it would be like to be that way. I have one anecdote. There's a little hike-in lodge at the top of Mount Tam down in Marin. And it has several cabins, and you know, it's lovely. It's just top of the world, except it was not accessible. And the other thing is, it was owned by a public agency. And so if any of you know of Richard Scaff, you might know why we decided that it had to be made accessible. And so I was project manager on that. We finished redecking, making access to the cabins, making the universal, you know, a tremendous project that you just think it's a hike-in cabin. And as we were finishing, 4 quad chairs, guys that have no and real limited mobility skid to a stop outside the front door and they yell, "Hey, thanks for doing that. That's exactly what we need." And I didn't know who those people were, didn't know that they could utilize things like this, and felt the money was foolish spending on that kind of thing until you see the person who can use that. Thank you very much.
Thanks. Commissioner Bauer?
Thank you very much, Chair Potter. And yeah, I am fully supportive of this ordinance. I think it's great. I really do think it's very important for our aging community to have accessible places to go and for other people to be visited by loved ones that aren't that mobile. I used to be on the Senior Advisory Committee many years ago, and I was working with the seniors, and it was a big concern of everybody's. And some people had to leave their homes because they weren't able to get around them anymore. And so I think this is really a step in the right direction, and I'm 100% supportive of it. I just would like to find some sort of wording to put in there so we don't have conflicting interests between doing this and also the ground floor commercial. That's all. I want us to have both, because I don't want there to be a development and, you know, them say we can't do ground floor commercial because we have to meet these standards. So somehow, I guess, let the city council know that we're concerned about that, and or I am, and that if some way there could be some wording in there to reflect that. I don't know how we can have both. Maybe require elevators or something like that. I know, I think we have approved projects that have been 3 stories that have not had elevators, and I know I've been up 6-story buildings without elevators, and I helped my friends bring futons up there. So up to the 6th floor of, up the staircase, and it was not fun at all. But I know elevators are very expensive, so developers aren't really that into putting them in when they don't have to. But if this means that they have to start putting them in, then I guess that's a good thing. So yeah, that was my only concern with this. Other than that, I think it's a great idea, and I'm looking forward to it being implemented. Thank you.
Thank you. And Commissioner Alonso?
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, staff, for the thorough report and presentation. Yeah, strong support of everything that's been presented tonight. I think it's a great step forward for the city, and certainly a model for the county. So thank you for your work on that. Yeah, I would just, for council consideration on the financial feasibility, what that looks like, who that applies to, if there are further exemptions for single family homes. I think the proposed ordinance should apply to single family homes and any residential development. But I certainly share concerns from homeowners on costs, like the public comment we received earlier. So want to try to strike that balance. But yeah, I think this is this is a public health issue, aging in place safely and hopefully affordably. So I think it's a great step, and thank you for your work.
Thank you, everybody. I just want to echo the comments that I think it was a great effort, and I fully support both the visitability and the universal design components. And I like the way that staff has presented the applicability in terms of numbers of units. I do agree with Commissioner Bauer about the concerns about making the ground floor space a premium and making sure that we can have the commercial, but also meet these requirements. So perhaps it does have something to do with, requiring the elevator. I did want to mention, because someone brought it up in public comment, and I thought that I had seen in the PowerPoint presentation that there was a public outreach inquiry regarding how many seniors would like to be able to age in place, and it was quite high. Was it 90% of folks who were asked about that said their preference was to be able to age in their own homes? So I think that's important to acknowledge. And I don't think it's that unique. My experience with my own parents and other folks who are aging is that that's the comfortable, familiar place for them to be able to navigate the latter years. I did want to make a comment regarding the remodels. I do appreciate the effort to expand this as far as possible. I would like to see any application to remodeling be strongly encouraged or with support from the city. But I do think that remodeling is a very personal and can be a costly endeavor. And a lot of times the provisions that are asked for in universal design, if they're not laid down in the foundation and the wall structure, they could be very hard to meet. So perhaps it's looking more at that and finding a balancing act there. So those are my comments on this item. Again, I appreciate everybody's participation. And with that, I'll close the item. And if there are no more questions, we can move on to old business. And this item is the Riverscape Townhomes, and it is continued by this commission from our January 11th, 2022 Planning Commission meeting, where we had an in-depth review of the site plan and what was being proposed in a lively discussion, a lot of feedback from the community. Tonight, the applicant is back with staff to make a short presentation. We'll be focusing on the ways in which the proposal has changed based on the input we received at the last meeting. And I would just encourage everybody participating in this item to try to focus on those changes so we don't rehash some of the information that we talked about in depth in the January meeting. And that would apply to the community as well as the commissioners. So with that, I would like to turn it over to staff for the staff summary. Oh, before we do that, I wanted to ask if any of the commissioners need to disclose any ex parte communications. And I will start by saying that on February 3rd, 2022, I participated in a half-hour virtual meeting where the applicant really reviewed the site plans and the architecture and the changes that they are making on the site, the same information that we'll be hearing tonight to go over the site plan, the architectural, and some of the amenities. So I don't know if there's any other commissioners who have any disclosures to make. Commissioner Wisman.
Thank you, Chair Potter. Similarly, the applicant reached out to me by email earlier last week. We were not able to find a time where we could get together, so we ended up not having a conversation, but it sounds like it was for the same purposes as the outreach to you.
Thank you. And Councilmember McDonald.
Similarly, Chair Potter, the applicant reached out and we reviewed the changes that they made. Thank you.
Okay, does anyone else have anything to report before we hear the staff report? Okay, seeing none, I'll turn it over to Director Hines.
And actually, Principal Planner Emmanuel Ursha, I was looking at for you on my screen, is going to be making the presentation this evening.
Excellent. We look forward to it.
Thank you. And I'm going to share my screen here. All right, can you all see that? Excellent. Great. So thank you, Chair Potter, members of the Planning Commission, members of the public. My name is Emmanuel Ursu. I'm the project planner for the Riverscape town homes that are proposed as part of the Riverfront Mixed Use Project. As Chair Potter mentioned, this item was continued from the January 11 meeting to allow the applicant to address input received at that meeting. This evening, the applicant will and the applicant team, I saw there's probably 7 or 8 of them here this evening. They will provide details regarding the changes made. However, before the applicant makes their presentation, I would like to spend a few minutes to provide the commission and the public with some additional background information. Visualize the proposal. It is part of the Riverfront project and one component of that project. The master plan for Riverfront was approved by the council with a mix of commercial, residential, civic, and recreational uses. It is on an approximately 40-acre site. including the Riverfront Park. It's 1 mile, about 1 mile east of the downtown Smart Station, which is in this area. And it is along the north bank of the river. This is the Petaluma River here, and the McNear Channel, the McNear Peninsula is right here. The former Pomeroy site, which is the precast concrete site, is just west of the project site. Highway 101 is on the east side. Lakeville Street is just north of the project site. And the planned southern crossing connecting to Petaluma Boulevard South would be along this alignment right here. The site is designated mixed use in the general plan land use map, and has the overall Riverfront project has T4 zoning on it, T5 zoning on it, T6, and the CS zoning, which is the community or civic uses. So in addition to the residential uses, the Riverfront Master Plan includes up to 60,000 square feet of office use up in this top left corner. It has 30,000 square feet of ground floor commercial retail around the central green, a hotel in this location, which is constructed, and a network of local pedestrian paths, class 1 multi-use path around the site, connecting it to the development of the future trail under Highway 101 in this location over towards the marina to the east, and then along the river to the west towards the downtown, and up in this location along Hopper Street. The master plan approved for the project includes 4 live-work units next to the ground floor commercial and across from the hotel. It also includes 35 townhomes for a total of 39 townhome units. That includes the 4 live-work units. As revised, the project includes that Riverscape is proposing includes 5 live-work units, 33 townhomes, 12 stacked flats, and the option for 11 accessory units for a total of 50 units, or 61 units if all 11 ADUs, accessory dwelling units, are constructed. The unit sizes now range from 492 square feet for the 11 optional ADUs to 2,123 square feet for the 12 Plan 3 units. Those are the Plan 3 units without the live-work component. The area around the central green has ground floor commercial, as I mentioned, with 100 apartments that were approved as part of the Riverfront Master Plan. If the conceptual Spirit Living proposal is developed, there would be 117 apartments plus the memory care units. So that 117 count does not include the memory care units. The average size is approximately 835 square feet for the conceptual plans that Spirit Living presented to the community, to the city. Then in addition to the townhomes and the apartments, the master plan includes 134 single-family homes. These are the homes that are currently under constructed. There's probably 40 some homes that are completed. These homes range in size from 100 square feet to just over 2,300 square feet. So as shown in this table, the Riverscape proposal and the Spirit Living proposal with the 11 ADUs and the units in North Bank, the single family homes, if those are all developed, there'd be 312 units total, 301 if none of the ADUs are developed. The Riverfront Master Plan included 273 units. This table also shows the unit sizes. The units in bold here are the proposed Riverscape units. Also should point out the count of units in the staff report for North Bank is incorrect. This is correct. I had only included phase 2 of the North Bank, so I apologize for that. The average size of all the units is 1,640 square feet. And that's the weighted average of all the units, assuming the proposal as presented before you and the proposal presented by Spirit Living. Some of the amenities that are included in the Riverscape project, the central green, which is about 1/3 of an acre, the active park, a little over 2 acres, about 1 mile of pathways around the perimeter of the project site, future location for a small craft facility, and almost 3 3/4 acres of park along the riverfront. The central green really acts as the living room for this development, and a gathering space for the residents and for workers and for visitors, with direct pedestrian access through lot number 6. This is where Spirit Living has their proposal. The townhomes are just over to the right on this exhibit. Pedestrians would be able to walk through the townhome or the mixed use component to the central green and continue through the central green through lot 5 over to the active park area. So this is the townhome location, pedestrian connection through the central green, and then over through to the active park. In the active park, there's a playground. It's already constructed in this location with pedestrian connection down to the direct connection to the single family homes in the project, and then the ball fields, which are ready for turf once we get some rain. And then along the riverfront, the riverfront park includes the class 1 path that goes around the entire perimeter of the site. This pathway would be extended to the west onto the property to next door, which we have a development proposal for. And then to the east, as I'd mentioned, there are seating areas, picnic areas, water fountains, and it is a lighted path. And that would be along this the entire length of the riverfront of the project. And then the mixed use path would also continue as part of Riverscape's proposal. They would be responsible for the construction of the port adjacent to their project. It would include the class 1 path. This is an excerpt from the landscape plan. They do have a bike repair station, drinking fountain, and seating and lighting along this pathway as well. And then lastly, this is the location for the future site for the small craft facility. We have a proposal for development of the Pomeroy site. This is going to be the conceptual study session will be on the agenda at our next meeting on February 22nd. This exhibit just shows how the proposed Pomeroy site would tie into the riverfront project. And again, the roadway network would tie in along with sidewalks on both sides of the road, and the riverfront park connection that would go continue extending west along the river and up along the McNear Channel. Bus stops located in the project and around the project are shown these red X's. As part of the project, Riverfront was required to pay for improvements to an existing bus stop over on Lakefield Street near Caulfield Lane. A bus shelter was put in, and then as part of the Pomeroy development site, the Scannell development, 2 bus stops are provided in this location. And then the proposal or the riverfront plans also call for a bus stop on either side of the central green. So this is a summary of the changes made to the development proposal since our last meeting. The applicant will go through the details in their proposal on all of these changes. But just very quickly, there are 3 new plans that were provided. The stacked flats, two designs, Plan 4A and 4B. There's 6 of each of those units, and then the 11 ADUs. The density increased. It's at 21.6 units per acre. The approved master plan had, with the 39 units, had it at 16.88 units per acre. With the addition of the units with 1-car garages, the average garage spaces per unit went down from 2 to 1.76. Changes were made to the architecture. 1 additional live-work unit was added. Additional trees, 29 additional trees were added to the landscape plan with 1 additional plant, tree species. And there were changes made to enhance the environmental sustainability of the project. We have applicants to look into the feasibility of affordable housing on site rather than paying a fee in lieu of doing the affordable housing on site. We'll need to hear from the applicant on their efforts to accomplish that. And then they also made space in the garages for the composting carts, recycling carts. This is the plan as it was presented at the January 11 meeting with the accessible units in red circle. And the big changes that they made is these units in this light blue purple color. These are where the stacked flats are proposed. So these are 1 unit on top of each other. So 2 units where previously they were the type 1 units or plan 1 units. And then they also made changes to, this is where the additional live work unit is. So this was just the 4 here. They added 1 on lot number 2. And then the corresponding architectural changes that were made. The project is subject to policies of the general plan, which are detailed in the staff report. The T4 zoning of the smart code, the subdivision standards, and the SPAR standards of the code. And the findings are laid out in the draft resolutions included in your packet. And then also the warrants requested for location of the private open space and the floor to ceiling height. They did increase the height of the live work units from 9 feet to 10 feet, but a warrant is still required. So with that, staff recommends the Planning Commission approve the site plan and architectural review for the project, along with the smart code warrants, and adopt a resolution recommending City Council approval of the vesting tentative map to subdivide the property. I hope that wasn't too fast. If you have any questions, I'd be happy to answer them.
Are there any quick questions before we hear a brief presentation from the applicant on the changes that have been made since we saw this application last? Okay, with that, let's move on then to hear from the applicant team.
Good evening, planning commissioners. Bear with me for one moment. Here we go. Okay, Emmanuel, thank you for that detailed staff report and updating the commission on some of the changes we made, as well as really doing a good job of setting the table as to the surrounding conditions and really how this project integrates into the current built environment and soon to be the future environment. The purpose of my presentation tonight really strictly is to highlight the changes that we made since we last spoke in January. Next slide. Here with us tonight is our consultants, and they are available in the event there are detailed questions at the end of the presentation. So tonight, there are really 7 updates we'd like to bring to your attention. Very exciting, and I think you'll see that it does, I think, strengthen the project and make it a better project. So we, as Emmanuel highlighted, we did incorporate 2 new floor plans, 4A, 4B. We've added battery storage units into the garage, so just adding to the sustainability of the project. We also increased permeable paving, added a bicycle repair station, made some changes to our live work building, which is building 1, and made some changes to the interior garage layouts so that we are SB 1383 compliant. Next slide. Really, this summarizes the major change. And what we heard in January was we needed to have some more diversity in our product offering. Our units were simply too large and really didn't meet the spirit of delivering affordable market rate housing to the market. So we went back and studied some ideas, and what we came up with was what you see in front of you is this stack flat concept, which created a plan 4A and a 4B. The 4A is 1,018 square feet, 2 bed, 2 bath. The 4B is 1,380 square feet, 2 bed, a den, and 2 bath, both with 1-car garages. So, you know, we killed 2 birds with 1 stone, so to speak, with this modification, and while at the same time still being able to meet the open space requirements per our warrant. So not only are we offering smaller floor plans with 1-car garage, but they're also meeting the open space requirement for this type of project. And with adding this, you know, what it does is it really creates almost a good balance of smaller square footage homes and larger square footage homes. So 44% of our homes are under 1,400 square feet. And with this adjustment, you took the project from 44 units up to 50 units. But as Emmanuel pointed out, if the ADU option is selected on Plan 2s, that will then subsequently increase the total unit count. So just to give you a cook's tour of the floor plans, it is a stacked unit, so with the 1-car garage. The purple unit here, as you can see, is the ground floor unit with the 1-car garage, 2 bedrooms, living area, and kitchen. The second story unit, the 4B, is their garage is of course on the first floor, that's denoted in red, and they'll access the second unit via a private stairwell where you come into the living area with 2 bedrooms, a den, a kitchen, and a entertaining area. We feel this is a pretty exciting plan, definitely provides affordability and housing opportunities for single person households or whatever the household makeup is that is compatible with a 2-bedroom unit. And then, as Emmanuel pointed out, the application of these units are in purple. There's a snip of the land plan below, and we've swapped those out for the Plan 1, for now the 4A and 4B in 6 locations. Next slide. We did add battery storage units to all garages as a standard amenity. And, you know, I think this rounds out our net zero energy package for this project. You know, in January, we basically has agreed to double the solar. So the idea would be the homes would generate enough power to not to draw from the electrical grid. And at the same time, we offered electrical vehicles charging stations to the garage. And really the missing piece of that to really make it a cohesive net zero program is this, you know, battery storage. So we, in conjunction with our solar provider, Sonova, we've agreed to deliver a package where each home will have a battery storage unit in the garage. I mean, I think this is extremely exciting. And, you know, for those who have electric cars, I mean, I don't think you're ever going to have to pay to charge your car if you just charge it at home. So this is a pretty robust, sustainable net zero package. And I would be hard pressed to find a community in the North Bay that offers the amount of solar we are, the charging stations, as well as the Tesla battery storage systems that'll be mounted in the garages. One of the other things we heard was from some of the commissioners is if we could explore increasing permeable pavement throughout the project. So working with our landscape architect, we've identified the areas that could be candidates for permeable pavement. And based on our analysis, we believe we can agree to applying 40% of permeable pavement to those areas. And in this slide, you can see a number of paseos and pathways throughout the community that are red. Those are private. Those are candidates for permeable pavement. And so in the absence of identifying specific areas, what we're saying is we're agreeing to a minimum of 40%. However, we're pausing and we'll identify those specific areas once we get into the landscape construction drawings of the site, because these are tight areas and they may, some of these areas that we're considering permeable pavement may require special conditions, drainage systems and things like that to accommodate it. So please be aware that we're only required to have 20%, and we are agreeing to go to 40% on the permeable pavement. We also reevaluated our tree planting plan, and we're able to find areas to plant 29 more trees in the subdivision. So that's almost a 20% increase of our total trees. And if you're looking at ratios, it's a 3.3 trees to home ratio, which is a pretty significant ratio. So, as this project matures and these trees grow, I mean, it's gonna have a very soft, peaceful feel, and with a significant amount of shade generated from those trees. Next slide. Briefly on the bike stations, we understand that the intent of this trail system and the city's trail network, it really is to encourage folks to get out on their bikes or use their feet to get from point A to point B. So in the spirit of help the city further that goal and achieve that goal, we've elected to install this bike repair station at this location on the trail. Not only is that a benefit to probably our residents, but anybody that is using that trail and for some reason gets a flat tire or needs a wrench on their bike at that point, they can. So it's just an acknowledgement of the importance of the bike system and bikes to as a means of transportation. And then we also agreed in January to incorporate bike racks as a standard in the garage. So that continues to be part of the project as well. Next slide. The live work building, building 1. So as Emmanuel mentioned, we originally were required to have 4 live works, but we've increased that to 5, and they're identified in that yellowish color there with the LW. So there'll be 5 live work buildings, and one of the units within the building. One of the concerns we did hear was that they didn't differentiate themselves from the look of some of the other units. So we've gone ahead and made some pretty radical adjustments to that front elevation, some of which are the same as what you saw last time with the more contemporary flat awnings, the windows. But what we've gone ahead and added to this was the gray siding you see there is vertical corrugated metal, which is a building material that has been used in other Petaluma projects. So that's a distinguishing element. The end of the buildings now have a plan 4A and 4B. So the massing has changed along that for that building. So those stack flats now flank that building on either end. And lastly, which I think is pretty exciting and will look really good, is we've adjusted the conceptual landscape for the front of those live work units to make them feel, to suggest that it's not just a residential unit, and let the landscaping illustrate more of a business type setting versus a residential setting. So we've done that with reconfiguring the flat work, the softscape. We put some tall columnar trees in the front and also implemented some lower fence work in the front to separate between the units, which you commonly see in the commercial office setting. So again, I think this, and this is an exciting elevation because this is what everybody's going to see when they come into into the development off Hopper. So I think there's significant curb appeal with what we've done here. Next slide. One of the concerns or questions that was brought up in January was what is this project going to do to allow for composting? And I spent a decent amount of time researching this, and from what I understand, yes, it is now a law, or it has been adopted as a state law, and there's this lengthy implementation process. And so here we are in 2022, and it's in effect. However, from what I understand, local jurisdictions need to adopt ordinances to enforce this program, and of course work with their local trash purveyor to allow for them to be able to pick up this type of composting. But in the meantime, that's out of our purview. But in the meantime, what we've done is redesign the layouts of our garages to provide a room for a third garbage can, or in this instance, a composting can, when that program does come online. So we have a garbage, which is here in the black G, recycling is the blue R, and then you've got your compost notch right there in the green. Next slide. So to sum it up, there's two summary slides, and what this slide strives to do is identify, some of the important aspects of the projects and whether or not they're required and whether or not we're providing them. And in every instance, we are providing them. And just to briefly walk down the list, solar, it is part of the building code in Title 24. However, we've agreed to effectively double that to allow our units to try to get to net zero. We've agreed to install as a standard electrical vehicle charging stations. That's a huge sustainability feature. Now, on top of that, we have battery storage units in there. So the solar, EV, and battery, that is the trifecta. We've got the bike racks in the garage. We've increased the pervious pavement area and basically doubling it. We certainly heard the commission and staff's concerns on one-car garages. So now we have 24% of our units with one-car garages, and an additional opportunity for an additional 26% more if the ADU option is selected. Our units are SB 1383 compliant and compatible. So when that program comes online, these units will be able to compost on a regular basis. Live work, as I mentioned a minute ago, we are required to have 4, and we're volunteering a 5th unit. So there's 5 live work units. Next slide, please. So the key takeaways, the pivotal word here is conforming. This project aligns with the general plan. It's consistent with the Riverfront Master Plan and consistent with the underlying zoning. And it really completes the hierarchy of housing types in this master plan, from single family to a higher density, which is townhomes, then to the utmost highest density, which is going to be the multifamily project around the town green. This project is environmentally friendly. It's a trophy case from an energy perspective. So I think this is something that staff and the commission and council members and the city as a whole could effectively brag about with their colleagues in other jurisdictions in terms of what setting the standard for environmentally energy conscientious projects. Certainly a safe project. This is a project that I would certainly feel safe in raising my family in terms of its surroundings. There's eyes everywhere, lighting everywhere. It's a safe project. And lastly, this is a project that we've been working with staff for the last 18 months, and they are recommending approval and recommending approval to the city council this evening. So I appreciate your time this evening, and we're here with our consultants, architects, engineers, our acoustical engineer, and our landscape architect to address any technical questions you may have. Thank you.
Thank you, staff and the applicant, for the work you put into hearing the input from the commission at the last meeting and presenting it to us tonight. With that, I'm going to ask the commissioners if they have any technical questions of the team. I'm not, Commissioner Bauer.
Sorry, I just have one question. That Tesla battery pack that you're installing, do you know if that can be used to like backwards charge the house, like in the event of a power outage? I know some of the units can do that, but I'm not sure if that one can. I just think that's a pretty cool idea if it could.
It absolutely does.
Okay, thanks. That's awesome. Yeah.
Yeah.
Commissioner Wissman.
Thank you, Chair. Just a couple of clarifications. The density metric that you referred to earlier, I think it was something like 21 dwelling units per acre. Was that including the ADUs, if all the ADUs were exercised, or was that net of those ADUs?
I believe that was without the ADUs.
Okay. All right. And then you said, I looked at the landscape plan, but for some reason, I can't see all the way out in the margin where the tree count is. You mentioned you increased the number of trees. How many is the total now?
The total number is 169, up from 147, I believe the number was originally.
Okay. Yeah, I reported that out in our tree advisory committee as being right around 150. So that'll be, I'll update that report. Okay, those are the only technical clarifications I have for now. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I would like to see if there's anyone from the public who has any comments, and I'll turn it over to our moderator, Mr. Roberts.
Thank you, Chair Potter. I do see we have 2 hands raised. I'll go ahead and share the timer. Okay, starting with Susan Kirks, followed by Rakusin. Susan Kirks, I've allowed you to speak. You'll need to unmute yourself.
Thank you, Eric. Well, I was present when this was brought before your commission earlier. And I'd just like to share with you that I called Basin Street Properties yesterday. Haven't heard back from them so that I can get the contact information for the townhomes or whatever the houses are that have already been constructed there. And because this is where you're looking tonight, it's and these houses that have already been constructed, it's an annual nesting site for migratory cliff swallows from Argentina. They fly thousands of miles and they nest at the Lakeville Overpass and the Petaluma River Bridge. And so we observed last year, I think I had told you, the negative impacts from the construction that was happening already. And the angles of the roofs, and I'm looking at what you're looking at tonight, are all going to be very appealing for the cliff swallows who will be displaced. Clearly, we're already seeing it from their historic nesting site. And Migratory Bird Treaty Act violations are likely to come into play. So I'm trying to prepare and find out who we need to contact from the Audubon Society, that's my cap I'm wearing, to begin to educate and prepare for what will undoubtedly be negative impacts to these migratory birds. And that kind of leads me to share with you that my heart breaks when I see what's before you this evening. It's an imposition onto a grassland area next to the river that historically has been foraging area and very close to the nesting site. It will cause so many negative impacts. And I just have to tell you that looking at this is not the type of development that we should be reviewing and considering at this time in Petaluma. The open space is so minimal. The human imposition and lack of balance is just stunning in a very negative way. And I say that from a conservation and a biological resources review perspective. I'm just so sad to see this, and I want to prepare you because it's going to be, there's going to be an issue with the migratory birds who nest historically there. Thank you.
Thank you, Susan, for your comment. And up next is Rakusan. I've allowed you to speak. You'll need to unmute yourself.
Thank you. And I just want to give kudos to the last speaker for bringing up really an important issue that for some reason I hadn't thought of. But I did have something much along those lines. You know, in this area, obviously we're right next to the river, so we're kind of a low level there in terms of sea, not sea level, but anyway, you know, I'm wondering if this is, you know, with marshlands being so carefully protected, and maybe this is something already publicly available, or maybe this is something that's been made available to people close with the project, the council, that kind of thing. But just interested in what kind of, I don't know if it'd be a feasibility study, but what kind of assessments have been done on impacts to a marshland area, local flora, fauna, and also if there's been any consideration, not necessarily vapor barriers, any consideration for preventing runoff there into the river from a proposed new development. I mean, something every riverfront development likely has to think of. Maybe what protections were put in place or what engineering aspects were designed for that. And then another, I think, a glaring issue for folks like me who get off the 101 there is just how this development marries with an idea of off that 101 roundabout. I know I believe there's already a proposed bridge to be built from that roundabout, that Petaluma Boulevard right near 101, going over to this development. Just how that blends with the plan, if you know there's any shared cost with the city, because obviously it'll be a massive benefit to this development to have that open traffic flow. And then finally, maybe one of the most obvious questions is just there's a lot of homeless activity and encampment underneath the 101 on that side of the river, what would look to be right next to this development. And I'm wondering if there have been any design considerations or any development considerations when it comes to negotiating and dealing with that homeless population. Thank you.
Thank you for your comment. And up next, we have Veronica.
That's what people are talking about.
Veronica, I've allowed you to speak. You'll need to unmute yourself.
Hi, good evening, commissioners. Thank you. I did comment before on this project, and I think there's been a lot of work done to answer a lot of the questions. My thoughts, though, are that we still are not going to reach our bikeability and walkability if we have 66% of our units having 2-car garages and over 44% of them having 2,000 plus square feet of living space that are not ADU or live work. I just wonder what kind of market we're actually going for with this project. And I was also asking the question, it hasn't been raised yet, about the affordable units. There's going to be a 40% increase in sellable units for the applicant. So is there a way that some affordable units could be included in this scenario? When it was presented, the central green keeps being called out as a central green. I'd like to actually point that out, that it's basically been cemented over and it has a few trees and a few benches. It is hardly a green space. So that is something to consider with the way the plan is now. I understand there are more trees and I appreciate that, but that also needs to be considered. Where are people going to go? We're going to have, with the proposed plan, with the density of this project combined with the other proposed units, that's not that much green space. And I do not think that was the initial intention in both the general plan and even the more recently 2014 plan approval. Also, biking and bike parking facilities. I just would like to see if there is going to be a bicycle oriented focus than having some bike parking. If people are really going to stop and have a coffee or go to a business, like I think this area was intended to have those bumpable spaces available for people, then we need to have those amenities. And then the last thing is the environmental impacts of these increased units. I know there was a letter that stated that there were none, but I have my reservations about that. Thank you.
Thank you, Veronica, for your comment. And I believe that was our last member of the public to comment on this item tonight. I will stop sharing my screen and pass it back to Chair Potter.
Thank you, and thanks everyone for the participation. Before we get into the Commission's deliberation, I wanted to ask Director Hines if you could just review the environmental impact report that was prepared for the Master Development Plan, which covers this development. And I understand that that was approved in 2014 by the council. Is that correct?
That's correct. There was, responding to a couple of the questions there was an environmental impact report for the overall riverfront project prepared and certified by the city council. So it covered this townhome development as well as the, overall, as many of Emmanuel's slideshow, and did look at, all of the things in environmental impact report. So it looked at biological impacts, had mitigation about, nesting bird surveys prior to initiating construction. It has stuff about drainage and runoff and that kind of stuff that are included and were included with all of the infrastructure that was done with the public improvement plans. The project was laid out to accommodate the Caulfield Crossing, which is a crosstown connector that is called for in our current general plan. So the terminus of the road lines up with the right of way on the opposite side of the river, and the elevation of that area and that terminus accommodates that future crosstown connector if that is built. So it was considering that kind of long-term overall infrastructure improvements that are called for in the general plan.
And reviewing the environmental impact report, any potentially significant effects to the environment, including for biological resources, there are mitigation measures that are required, and this project is bound by those mitigation measures and the mitigation monitoring program. So I think it's important.
That is correct.
And it's important we don't lose the context for that as we move forward to implement a component of a project that is already in the general plan and approved by the council.
That's correct. And there are conditions of approval that are in the draft resolution that specifically reference those mitigations applying to this, any of those applicable mitigations applying to this project should it be approved.
Great. With that, I would like to see by a raise of hands any comments from the commission as we deliberate and take a vote on this item. Okay, why don't we have Councilmember McDonald kick it off?
Thank you very much. Well, I'm very pleased to see that they took all the input from the commission so seriously. Speaking for me, I was most focused on the oversizing of units and whether they were contributing to the walkable, bikeable area. And I didn't see this change coming. I'm really glad that they were able to come up with a concept of stack flats and add 6 more units, all at that 1,000 square foot size. And it's we don't need a lot of the larger end of things. We need more like this, especially when we're talking about trying to focus on our walkable, bikeable areas So I was very happy to see those extra 6 units created. I'm anxious to see what happens with the affordable housing. Certainly they don't have to have it inclusionary. They're going that other direction, but I would prefer inclusion. Inclusion is our best social outcome as well as economic outcome on that issue. So I'm anxious to see how TBD turns out in the end. The battery ad, I did not see that. I wish Commissioner Reiter was here tonight, and others who really are front runners for getting us over to real conservation when we use electricity, when we generate solar in the daytime, but consume a carbon-based electricity at nighttime without the sun. We're missing the opportunity. Having the battery in the product really is a game changer for getting us off carbon. And then the increase of permeable materials. We talk about how the stormwater gets to the bay, rules, all of the best management practices required of any project. They talk about 2 things. They talk about volume capture and they talk about quality treatment. And so any low impact development best management practice, the LID BMPs that are used on these things, they have to capture the water, but what happens when it goes through permeable is it takes out all that. It's a microfiltration system, and the more that you have, the more effective we are at removing particle matter that's going into our waterways. And so I'm excited to see them step up to that. And while batteries is a big expense, I don't know if we'll get that from every development. Certainly we can push for more permeable areas on all developments. And so looking at this, I'm just seeing this, they've kind of turned this into a model. I would love for us to turn to Scannell next door and say, here's the bar, guys. This is what you need. This is the minimum now. This is the new bar. So I'm really pleased that they've listened to so much of what we had to say. Thanks.
Thank you. Commissioner Alonso?
Thank you, Chair Potter. I just want to thank staff and the applicant for the updated information tonight. I think the project is much improved, and I appreciate the applicant willing to work with staff and hear our feedback on some of the improvements we're seeing tonight. So I think the project's in a much better place. It meets the goals of the specific plan and the general plan. And I think the increased visibility of those live work units at the front is a great change, along with the ADUs and the 1-car garages. I think it's just a very strong project, in addition to the sustainability measures that you've added, like Councilmember McDonald mentioned. And something that Councilmember McDonald has talked a lot about during his tenure on the commission is really the different type of units. And I think with the update tonight, I think having a smaller square footage is better here. And I think it's a strong addition. Having a wider range of units available for folks is a really strong amenity for potential folks to live here. So again, I think, the challenge with this entire project, really, and like what we heard from last year on the senior facility is, these approvals were made a very long time ago, and we're hearing it in 2022. So I think we have to do what we have, and I just appreciate the applicant willing to come to the table and listen. So thank you very much.
Commissioner Wissman.
Thank you, Chair. One more technical question. And I didn't dig this deep into the landscape plan, so apologize if it's already in there. Is there a metric stated for the tree canopy, the overall tree coverage as a percentage of area? That is a metric that we track in the tree advisory committee on a couple of goals that we have. And so I just want to, again, be able to report back to them on where this project in and of itself comes in on that scale.
I'm not aware of them. You're talking about like a shade coverage canopy coverage requirement?
Yeah, we've seen a couple of reports, like in the relief report that we saw, about a goal of reaching somewhere between 20 or 30% canopy coverage. And so I just wanted to get an idea. My guess is that this far exceeds that. But as it's applied to the greater area, exceeding one area makes up for deficits in another. So I just want to get some idea if there was a metric that you knew about for this area or for this project.
Yeah, I'm not aware of one. I don't know if the applicant's architect, I believe the landscape architect is on the line. May be able to answer that. There you are.
Hi. Yeah. Actually, we have not done any kind of matrix about the canopies. So it's something that I could provide you if you guys are interested. Just for your information, I can provide that, but I don't have it laid out.
Okay. It's an FYI. So if it's something that you can calculate and pass along, that'd be appreciated. So going from that to a couple of acknowledgements, like others said, I definitely appreciate the increase in the permeable hardscape. I think that's something that we asked a couple of other developments about, and so I appreciate you coming back and increasing that. I'd also acknowledge, especially coming out of the solar industry, I'd echo what Commissioner McConnell said about the inclusion of battery storage in addition to solar and the integrated elements there, along with EV charging, is truly exceptional. It's exceptional even if it was an option, but over the top exceptional as a standard offer. And I think you're right; it does set an excellent standard for others, and as a commission to allow us to point to this. So I appreciate that inclusion and going that extra step. I think that's all my points for now. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Wissman, and now Commissioner Hooper.
Thank you, Chair Potter. I'd like to start by saying that I'm appreciative to the applicant for being so responsive to us. I don't think this is a model project, but I think this is a model response. I appreciate the increase in permeable materials and the battery. I do think, however, that this is where affordability plays such a critical role, because if these units are going to folks in town who are just looking for places to live, who work in the area, that's one thing. If this is going to people 2 counties over who work 2 counties over, then your climate gains are minimal. Outside of that, I appreciate the reduction in garage space. I do think it could be more, but I see where you're compromising with us. I do get nervous when I hear about affordability, but it's not part of the inclusionary ordinance because that really doesn't tell me much in terms of where you're going to go or what that end result's going to be. Overall, I recognize that this is about as far as this will probably go, and a lot of my other issues are really with the underlying plan. So I just want to say thank you, and I appreciate how responsive you've been to us.
Seems to be a theme tonight, and I'm going to turn it over to Commissioner Bauer.
Thank you very much, Chair Potter. Well, in response to some of the public comments, I think if this were a new project in front of us today, I don't know if I would have been 100% supportive of putting a development of this size over green space right next to our river, of riparian corridor and wanting to protect that for natural habitat species. But it was approved by councils and commissions before us, and so it's here and it's what we have, and it's our job to make the best of it. And I think we did, and I think we did a great job, and the applicant was very responsive to our requests and made a pretty good project even better. And I just love the increase in the permeable areas, the bike pulleys in the garage and the bike repair station. I like more trees being put in, and I really love the Tesla battery being installed. I think that's really great and very important in these days of power outages when we're stuck with these wildfires, that we have to have these planned power outages. And I think that will make people that are living here much more able to stay at home when these things happen. So I applaud them for making those changes. Thank you so much for doing that. And yes, I'm supportive of the project. Thank you.
Thank you. And I just want to applaud the efforts of staff, the applicant, this commission, and the public, because I feel like we all rolled up our sleeves and did make a good project even better. And we did help to bridge some earlier decisions that have been made with newer decisions and newer mandates for us to be more resilient. So I appreciate the battery storage, the trees, all of the work that went into this. The one thing I would ask, which is not really attached specifically to this project, but if the council, if staff and the council might consider some kind of a program for a wayfinding for the bike routes and the trails, so that these projects that are getting built out within a good proximity to our smart station in downtown, that it will make it easier for residents and visitors to find their way to make those connections. Because I think that that's always a challenge when you have new development going in. So those are my comments. I see that Director Hines has her hand up, and then after that, I'd like to ask for a motion for tonight.
I just wanted to add, Chair Potter, that I believe we currently have an application for a master sign program for the Riverfront project, which does include wayfinding signs. So that is in the works with directional signs to pathways, smart station, the different components of the project, those type of things. So
great. Well, that's
in the works.
That's great news. Thank you for that update. So I don't know if there's a commissioner who'd like to make a motion. We have two actions we're going to be acting on tonight. One is for the SPAR and the other is for the vested subdivision map. Councilmember Alonso, Commissioner.
Thanks, Chair Potter. Can we make it in one motion? Is that okay, Heather? Or do you prefer separate?
I think it is okay if the vote is going to be the same for the two. So if I would encourage to, if anyone feels they're going to vote one way on one and a different way on the other, then we should do two votes.
Okay. I'll make a motion to approve the resolution for the SPAR and then a resolution for the vesting tentative subdivision map for the Riverscape townhomes at Riverfront.
Seconded.
Okay, it's been moved by Commissioner Alonso and seconded by Vice Chair Bauer. I think we take a roll call vote on this one.
Potter?
Aye.
Bauer?
Aye.
Hooper?
Aye.
Alonso?
Aye.
Ryder, absent. Quisman?
Aye.
McDonald?
Aye.
Looks like 6 yeses. And 1 absent.
Okay, well, thank you, everybody, for your attention and focus tonight. We are going to adjourn the meeting, and the next regularly scheduled meeting for this Planning Commission is on Tuesday, February 22nd.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you. Good night.
Good night.
Thank you.
Thank you
Good
so
night.
much.
Right.
Recording stopped.